Welcome to a journey through the mysterious mists of history, where ancient secret societies like the Knights Templar and the Illuminati not only exist in the shadows, but weave invisible threads that control the world. This is not a story, but an epic, passed down through candlelight and time-worn corridors. Each step will lead you through ancient rituals, unspoken oaths, and secrets that have lain dormant for centuries. But remember, the closer the light, the deeper the darkness. And perhaps, after the final door opens, you will realize, what lies hidden will not only change history, but also change you. In the twilight of an era that history no longer remembers, when the sun was red as a wound closing, a group of horsemen rode across the parched steppe, carrying not goods but iron chests sealed with red wax. The wind swirled through the yellow grass, blowing black cloaks embroidered with silver crosses, the mark of those who would never give their names. The leader was a tall rider, his hood half hidden, revealing eyes as cold as steel. In his chest was not gold, not silver, but a black stone engraved with ancient characters that even the oldest scholars of the temples had forgotten. The stone was called in the darkness the Heart of Night. They did not stop in cities, did not take refuge in monasteries. They rested only among wind-buried ruins, and when night fell, they lit smokeless fires, gathered in circles, and exchanged short passwords. Among those words, there were words that did not belong to any human language, but they made the air around them vibrate, as if the earth itself were listening. In the darkness, from afar, another figure appeared, not riding a horse, not wearing armor. He wore a long, ivory-white cloak that reached the ground, and in his hand he held a large scroll of parchment wrapped in red string. He approached, not greeting, but simply handed the scroll to the leading knight. When the red string was cut, inside were not words, but a map drawn in silver ink on a dark background. The passing firelight made the lines on the map move slightly, as if it were not ink, but real rivers flowing. In the middle of the map, a small circular mark was engraved with an open eye, an eye that not only looked forward, but seemed to look back through time. The gray-eyed knight nodded slightly, then spoke in a deep voice that seemed to echo from the stone. This road will lead all to a place where there is neither light nor darkness. No one asked, no one answered. But from that moment on, the wind changed direction, and the knights began to turn away from the old path, heading south, where legend said that beneath the yellow sand, a city had slept for 1,000 years, keeping a secret that both the Templars and the Illuminati had fought over since the beginning of time. The desert opened up like a giant snakeskin, the scales reflecting the sickly sunlight, undulating in the middle of the dunes as if someone had just pulled an invisible hand from the ground. The knights entered the silence of the sand, where the sound of their horses' hooves was also swallowed up, leaving only long shadows like spilled ink. Everyone wrapped a thick scarf around their mouth, but no one hid the silver cross on their chest. They left it exposed like a second eye, both guarding and challenging. By the afternoon of the third day, the sand had changed color, from pale gold to reddish brown, like old blood dried by the sun. There, stone tablets rose from the sand, tilted like the teeth of a dead giant. Each tablet was carved with curves and dots, not straight, not periodic, but joined together in an invisible flow. The leader raised his hand, the caravan stopped. He dismounted, and placed his bare hand on a tablet whose corner had been chipped. Cold. cold as the water of a deep well under the snow. The language is below, he said, his voice dry as dust. On the face is only shadow. They set up camp among the stone tablets, lighting a smokeless fire with black oil in a horn flask. The man in the ivory robe, the one who had given the map, stood still before the fire, his gray eyes dim, as if peering through the flames and reading the formless words. The leading knight opened the iron chest and took out a black stone, the heart of night. The stone did not reflect the fire, but the fire reflected in it seemed to stretch into translucent red threads, wrapping around the smooth, unblemished surface. Put it here, he said, pointing to a circle of sand that the other knights had sprinkled with crushed glass. Tonight, the sand will answer. The wind slithered through the cracks in the tablets, making a straight flute like a stretched thread. In the sky, the new moon was as thin as a fingernail. When the 4 directions had been marked with small wooden posts, each with a blue bronze bell without a blade, the ivory-robed man unrolled the silver scroll, knelt, placed 3 fingertips on the circle with the open eye in the middle, and began to whisper. It was not a prayer, nor a command, but rather a repetition of the true name of the desert, a name from before the sands blossomed into flowers of the wind. The sand moved. Not because of the wind. Each small grain of sand stood upright for a moment, then leaned in one direction, forming extremely fine ripples that drifted toward the center of the glass circle. The tongueless bells rang softly at the same time, emitting a deep sound like a call from the bottom of the sea. The heart of night breathed a very light sigh, either it was just fire, or the stone itself had just remembered its placement between the collars. Someone is coming, a rider whispered from behind his scarf. Not from the wind. From the edge of the camp, where the shadows of the steel were longest, came tall, lean figures, clad in ash-colored robes. They walked barefoot on the hot sand as though on a cool sheet, each step left no trace. Their faces were covered by hoods, but on each forehead was a small eye painted in black ink, the pupil pointing up rather than out. The leader of them held a thin ceramic lamp, the flame as blue as a knife. The keepers of the numbers of the shadows, the man in white said softly, still holding the silver map. They come at the right time, as in the tales. The ash travelers did not speak. They stopped at the edge of the glass circle, 3 arms' lengths from the heart of night. The lead rider took a step forward, pulling his hood back enough to show the thin scar that ran from his cheekbone to the corner of his eye. "We seek no fighting," he said, his voice echoing as if he were passing through a tunnel. "We seek a buried door." One of the ashes tilted his head slightly, as if listening to an ant. "The door does not open with hands," he replied, his voice thin but not weak. "The door opens when its name is given." The man in white looked up, his smile as fleeting as a knife passing over paper. "His name," he said, "is written in silver on dark skin. But the name has a shadow. We need the shadow before we need the name." The wind retreated. The fire shrank. The sky dropped an invisible speck of ash. The one with the blue ceramic lamp reached out and touched the air at the edge of the glass. A tiny purple lightning flashed out, then dissipated. "You carry the heart," he said. "But the heart only beats when it is immersed in the night. Here, the night is drained. The leading rider glanced over the stones as if counting the scattered symbols one last time. "Then call the knight," he replied. "Down below." The man in white withdrew his hand from the map and stood up straight. He took 3 black pebbles from his sleeve and placed them evenly around the stone. Each pebble had a small hole carved into it. He bent down and blew into the hole like a child's flute. 3 sighs, 3 directions, and the sand suddenly receded a little, like water placed between 2 pots. Below, a flat layer of stone like glass appeared, cold and damp as if it had just been lifted from the bottom of a well. "The city," said a faceless rider, almost breathing. "In the middle of the desert." The stones tilted, the shadows rolled slowly. The ash men took a step back, bowing their heads. "We do not enter," said the one with the ceramic lantern. "We only bear witness." The leading rider lifted the heart of night and placed it on the flat stone. The stone did not ring, but in everyone's bones there was a light tapping, like fingernails on a turtle shell. The man in white closed his eyes, speaking in the voice of the old sand. "O place where there were once steps of shadow and wells of arrows, take back the heart that was ripped from your chest on the night of erasure. We do not ask, we return." In that moment, the sand around the glass circle retreated half a span closer. The lines on the flat stone, lines that were not yet visible to the naked eye, began to glow faintly, connecting to form a spiral path. From deep below, a cold, damp breath blew back, carrying the smell of rusted iron and long-dried flowers. "Go," the knight said. Only 3 descended, the leading knight, the man in white, and a young knight with long hands like those of a harpist. The 3 ash knights held green ceramic lamps to the edge of the glass. The rest of the knights pitched tents close to the steel, waiting like mute shadows. Under the stone, the stairs were wide enough for 1 person, the walls were engraved with words that no one could read, so smooth that it seemed as if their feet did not touch them. They walked as if floating, each step cutting a thin slice from the surface of the world. At the 49th step, the wind died, the wind of the underworld. At the 72nd step, the heartbeat of the heart of night began to be heard. Not with the ears, but with the knuckles. At the 90th step, an altar appeared, 4 black stone pillars, a long low table, and in the middle a half-broken dome. On the table, a black glass sphere as big as a child's head, its surface speckled with silver dots, shifting slightly like a misaligned star. The man in white knelt, resting his forehead on the table. The young knight stood still, his eyes wide open, as if someone had taught him how to see again. The leading knight did not kneel, but only placed his palm on the sphere. Cold. And behind the cold was a voice without sound, but meaning, not to take. To remember what? The knight asked, his lips not moving. Remember that you were once a pack and a man, a pillar and a shadow. Remember that the name brothers once meant a mouth to feed together. Remember that the eyes are open not to see, but to be seen through. The man in white opened his eyes, looking through the black glass as if at the bottom of a deep well. The eye of the ancestor, he whispered. Not to see the world, but to see the world back. He lifted the silver scroll, turned it sideways so that the ink flowed like a river down the table. So what door awaits after this one? Inside the sphere, the silver dots stopped moving, then one by one they fell like falling stars, forming a long flat object, a knife blade, or a key, or a mason's ruler. The young knight swallowed. "The ruler," he said. The ruler was lost when the masons stopped building for a common roof. The leading knight removed his gloves, leaving his bare hands to touch the stone. The scar on his cheek stung slightly. The ruler did not measure stone, the murmur of meaning. The ruler measured oaths, the man in white chuckled softly, the laughter of a brittle piece of paper being broken. "We have laid our oaths in the world's scales," he said, "and the world has secretly taken them away. Now pay." The stone table in the middle suddenly dropped a finger's breadth. From below crept a faint strip of light like the back of a fish in the night water. The young rider took a step back, the leading rider held still, the man in white put 2 fingers into the strip of light and drew out a strip as thin as tin foil, as heavy as a story on the tongue. On the strip was carved a single figure, 2 hands placed one on top of the other. A small, closed eye carved in the center of the table, the mark of the shadow bearers, the rider said, hoarsely. "Not ours. It belongs to the other side." "Yes," the man in white replied, his voice powdered with sand. "And the other side waits in the north, under a church without a tower, in a city where the lamps never go out." The black sphere went out. The heart of night on the rider's shoulder suddenly became twice as heavy. Up above, where the sand held the glass, the tongueless bell rang out a deep, hollow note. The leading rider lifted the tin foil, folded it in half, and tucked it into the edge of his inner garment. "Let us go," he said. "The night is long enough down here." They went up the stairs, the steps shortening like a rug being pulled. When they reached the open edge, sand suddenly blew in like a cough. The ashes still stood there. The blue ceramic lamp still burning, but the light had changed color, a dark green like moss. The lamp bearer lowered his hand. "You have taken part of the shadow," he said. "Carry it across the water before the sun changes its name." "Over which water?" the rider asked. "Through water it does not wet," he replied, the blue fire flickering as if 2 eyelids met. "Water of letters. There the measuring rod will meet only the hands of those who build houses with words." The man in white nodded. "We go north," he said, as if repeating a pre-written sentence. "To the city of lights." The ashes withdrew silently, leaving no trace, as if they had melted into the bones and sand. The night sky was lower. The new moon was sharper. The remaining riders put out the fire, tied the iron chest, and buried 3 wooden stakes. Before mounting, the young rider stopped by a stele. On the stone, on the chipped edge, were engraved very faintly 2 words that did not belong to this era. He placed the tip of his finger on it, then withdrew his hand as if touching the edge of a knife. "Don't put the words on your tongue," said the lead rider, not looking at him. "Put them on your throat. Your tongue will say something else." They left the desert before dawn, not for fear of the sun, but for fear of another eye that woke with the dawn, an eye that looked back through time, to see who had awakened the city buried in the sand. The road north opened out in flat stretches of land, then rocky grassy hills, then deep valleys filled with mist. The wind changed its tone, carrying the smell of damp wood and silver moss. On the horizon, closer each night, was a steady, unblinking light, like a city lit not because it was dark, but because it did not want to forget, in a ramshackle inn on the edge of the forest. They stopped. The old woman who kept the inn did not ask for their name, but only placed on the table black bread and thick soup. On the walls, wooden pieces carved with mason's charms hung in a circle. The young rider looked long, his eyes fixed on a piece of wood carved with overlapping hands. The man in white placed an old coin on the table, thin, light, almost a memory of metal. The old woman took it, nodded, and said, her voice like rolling stone powder, "Go to the place where the lamp does not go out. There, the church without a tower holds what we do not call a name. But watch the ceiling, it collapses not because it is heavy, but because it has heard too much." The leading knight thanked her in silence. As they went out the door, the wind blew out the candle on the table. The old woman did not light it again. The darkness of the inn was still warm. On Saturday night, they stood on the edge of a wide valley, from which rose a soft dome of light, not shimmering, not yellow, not white, a lens-like light, as if someone had polished the sky to reflect it on the ground. The city of lights was revealed, low-roofed, narrow alleys, a small river running like a silver thread through its heart. In the center, a towerless church stood much lower than the others, its old dome dark, its wooden doors thick as the lips of one who had kept silence for a long time. They dismounted at the edge, leading them by the hand. The man in white tied the roll of leather to his belt, hiding it under his shirt. The leading rider held the iron chest and held the heart of night like a child who had trouble sleeping. The younger rider carried a folded sheet of tin foil, tucked close to his heart. The sound of footsteps on the cobblestones sounded like dry raindrops. No one in the city looked at them, not because they did not see, but because every eye was occupied by something invisible, the nostalgia for the light when there was no light. The church door opened before they knocked. Inside, cool as a crevice in the rock, heavy as someone's hand on his forehead. Low ceiling, short pillars, old wooden benches, traces of burning pine resin incense. In the middle, there was no altar, only a square paved with stones like a checkerboard. The doorkeeper stepped out of the shadows, gray robe, bare arms. Around his neck a bronze plate shaped like a carpenter's ruler, with a closed eye carved in the middle of the ruler. "You take the ruler," he said, without asking. "And you take the heart." "We take what was taken from its place," the leading knight replied. "And return what was blinded to the builder." The doorkeeper bowed, gesturing to the square. "Put down your oath," he said, his eyes like wet lead. "Here, people measure not by arm spans, but by the length of silence." The man in white unrolled the scroll and laid it on the stone. The young rider pulled out a sheet of tin foil and laid it on top. The leading rider placed the heart of night beside it. The three things, silver, tin, night, lay still like three words in an unread sentence. The doorkeeper knelt, placed 2 fingers on the edge of the door, and closed his eyes. The air shivered, the ceiling was a breath lower. From somewhere in the wall, a steady sound rose, neither high nor low, like the turning of a watermill in a dream. the oath is measured," the doorkeeper said softly. "But the oath-giver is missing a part of the shadow." "The shadow is to the south," the man in white replied, without hesitation. "We took a part in the desert. The rest is in the river of words." The doorkeeper opened his eyes and smiled. "Then swim," he said, pointing to the floor. The square of stone cracked, revealing a black surface of water as smooth as glass beneath. On the surface of the water, letters floated, drifting like silver fish, letters everyone knew and letters never named. The young knight took a deep breath, threw off his cloak, and stepped into the water. The water was not wet, as the ashes had said, but it was as cold as the tone of the first question. The leading knight followed him, carrying the heart. The man in white stood at the edge, holding the scroll in his hand. His eyes fixed on the bottom where there was no bottom. "Swim along the middle," the gatekeeper instructed. "Avoid the above and the below. In this river, they lead to the same mouth." They swam. The letters slid over their shoulders, over their necks, over their lips, leaving a faint metallic taste. When they touched a wrong letter, their chests felt as if they had swallowed a piece of glass. When they touched a right letter, their bodies felt a thread lighter, as if someone had just taken a bag of sand off their backs. The young rider reached out and caught a sinking letter. It had no shape like a letter, but rather a look that had not yet been spoken. He held it, feeling his heart beat with the water. The leading rider held his heart close, so that the stone would not drift away. In the middle of the river, the middle opened into a black hole. The hole did not go down, did not go up, but in. They crawled across. The water did not flow, but thoughts flowed like ropes sliding through pulleys. On the other side, a dry, black bank, and a wall painted with shadow, not lime. On the wall, a pair of hands overlapped, the middle eye still closed. The young rider placed the letter he had caught on the stone-carved palm. The eye was open. Not wide open, just a thin slit like a knife blade. From that gap, a thread of light flows out, wraps around the heart, then slips into the tin foil. All at once lightens. And from somewhere, very deep, a voice that is not as loud as a sound passes through. "Brotherhood is when my shadow stands just above yours." The man in white, standing on the opposite shore, closes his eyes for a moment as if to let the sentence flow through his heart. Above them, the city of lights is still burning, but somewhere far away, one light, just one light, has just gone out. When they returned to the towerless shrine, the black water closed as if it had never been opened. The square stone panel was intact, the silver letters on its surface gone, leaving behind a cold stone as if it had been repolished. The doorkeeper was still kneeling, his hands still on the edge of the panel, but his eyes were now as deep as two wells that had just drunk a rainstorm. "You have taken the rest of the shadow," he said, his voice deeper, heavier. "The measuring tape is long enough now to measure both the shadow and the words. But the path is not over." The man in white placed the silver scroll on the panel, his hand trembling slightly like someone touching wet velvet. "We have one part left," he said. "The part of the breath." The doorkeeper tilted his head, his smile as thin as a crack in the lime wall. "The breath is not kept in the tower or in the city. It is kept in a place where there is no echo, a room deep beneath the mountain, where all words die before they touch the wall. The lead rider stepped forward, his gray eyes already reading the answer. "Which mountain?" "The one with the empty middle," the doorkeeper replied. "The one whose shadow has no peak." Outside, the wind changed direction. From the north, the cold air fell like someone's hand. The city of lights was still bright, but the light had become sharper, harder, like a sword sharpened on stone. People in the street began to close their doors, lower their curtains, and burn low candles in their houses, though outside it was still bright. The group left the church when the shadows had thickened in every corner of the alley. No one saw them off, no one looked after them. There was only the sound of the small bell, very far away, very thin, like a drop of water falling forever in a deep pit. The third night after leaving the city, they came to the edge of a mirror-like lake. Surrounded by smooth white rocks, bare of vegetation. In the middle of the lake, a huge rock jutted out, shaped like a mountain that someone had cut across, leaving the middle bare, revealing a huge black void. The water reflected that void like an open eye, but the iris was gouged out. "The mountain is left empty in the middle," the man in white said softly. "And the breath is locked inside." The young knight looked at the water and suddenly saw his reflection distorted, his head and chest twisted slightly as if someone was holding him. He took a step back, but his reflection remained distorted until his eyes could no longer bear to look. They did not look for the boat. The man in white stepped straight into the water. The cold water was not deep, only knee-deep, but each step was like stepping into a dense silence, heavier than stone. The leading knight followed closely, carrying the heart of night in an iron chest. The young knight walked behind, his hand still holding the tin foil that had absorbed the shadow and the words. As they approached the foot of the mountain, they found a narrow opening, just wide enough for a man to squeeze through. Inside, the light from outside vanished at the threshold, leaving a darkness as thick as black velvet. The man in white reached out and touched the wall, pulling out a few cold dusts as fine as ash. "The ashes of the voice," he said, "when it dies." They entered. The room inside was larger than they had imagined, but it was quiet. Each footstep sank like a stone thrown into mud. The vaulted ceiling was high, but it did not reflect the light of the blue ceramic lamp the city gatekeeper had given them before they left. In the corner of the room, on a low stone pedestal, stood a long black ceramic vase, its lid bound with a twisted silver cord. The leading knight put down the chest and advanced. As soon as he touched the silver cord, a cold current ran down his spine, carrying a faint sound, like someone taking a final breath before sinking into the sea. The man in white stood beside him, his hand on the scroll, whispering, "This breath is my last oath." The young knight looked at the ceramic jar, feeling as if something inside was beating gently, slowly, not following the rhythm of a human heart. "What if I open it?" he asked. "Then the night will breathe," the lead rider replied. "And all that has been swallowed will be returned." He pulled at the silver thread. The thread dissolved into smoke. The lid of the jar shook, then slid off. A cold breath hit his face, the smell of wet stone and old blood. In the darkness, a thin silvery mist crept out, curling around his neck, slipping into his ears, touching his lips, and then disappearing, as if it had slipped into their very breath. The man in white tilted his head, his eyes dimming. "It has chosen," he said. "No one can hold his breath. It dwells only in those who are quiet enough to hear themselves breathe." The lead rider turned to the younger rider. "You will carry it," he said. "Not because you want it, but because it has chosen you." The younger rider swallowed, his lungs feeling heavier, but his breathing was strangely deep and slow. Somewhere deep in his chest, there was a long, low hum, like the sound of the sea in a conch shell. They left the room, crossed the lake, and when they reached the other side, the wind rose for the first time since they had come to the mountain. It carried with it a sound, not a sound, but the memory of a sound, like the smell of a forgotten song. The man in white clutched the silver scroll, whispering, "Now we have heart, shadow, letter, and breath. Only one remains, blood." The leading rider nodded, his eyes looking east, where the dawn was a faint line. "Blood is where the ground refuses to bury," he said. "There we shall meet the hand that wrote the first line." The man in white smiled faintly. "And the hand that will write the last." They left the mountain as their own shadows began to lengthen in a single direction, unchanging even though the wind turned several times a day. The road east led through fields of cracked earth, each one like a shedding snake's skin, the smell of smoldering minerals seeping from the cracks. The sun rose and fell, but there was no real sunrise or sunset here, just shifting light, from pale gold to dull red, and back again as if the sky had never stopped breathing. On the fifth day, they came to a strange clearing. The ground was covered with ankle-deep white dust, but beneath the dust was hard, smooth rock, hot as molten metal. The ground was strewn with slender stone pillars, each one as tall as a man, rising like a giant finger. In the middle of the field, a black circle opened up, bottomless, not a pit, but an open wound. The young rider stood at the edge of the black circle, feeling the white dust beneath his feet quiver ever so slightly, like slow pulses of blood. "This is where the earth refuses to bury," he said, his voice soft but ringing in his throat. The man in white nodded. "The blood here has never been drained. And whoever keeps it will not let it go easily." From the other side of the black circle, a figure stepped out, tall, thin, clad in a long ochre robe, his face hidden by a smooth stone mask, eyeless, mouthless. In his hand was a staff made from a long bone, the end of which was tied with a dark cloth, stained with dried crimson, like blood that had lain dormant for centuries. He stopped before them, thrusting his staff into the ground. The sound echoed from the dark circle, not a crash, but the hiss of air being drawn down. "You come for blood," the voice said, not through the mouth but straight into the head, cold and dry as sand through a crack in the rock. "But blood is not for those who dare not spill it." The leading knight stepped forward, setting down the iron chest containing the heart of night. "We bring heart, shadow, letter, breath," he said. "We bring all back to fulfill our oath. The blood that remains is the last vein." The figure tilted his head, as if to test his breath. "Blood is not in this earth," he replied. "Blood is in those who dare to put their hearts in the hands of the earth." The man in white turned to the young knight, his eyes piercing his chest. "You were chosen by the breath," he said. Now the blood will choose you, or no one. The young knight swallowed, then stepped up to the edge of the black circle. The heat that rose from it swept across his face like a dead man's hand. If the blood is mine, he asked, will the oath be fulfilled? Fulfilled, the figure replied immediately. And you will be a part of it. Without further ado, the young knight opened his breastplate, exposing the flesh beneath. The figure raised his bone staff, the dark cloth touching the center of his chest. A hot iron current flowed into his heart, spreading throughout his body. He felt his veins glow red beneath his skin, like fiery snakes slithering across his body. From the black circle, a drop of blood larger than a hand rose, not liquid, but thick, like molten red glass. It hovered in the air, quivering slightly, then slid into the young knight's chest, disappearing completely. He breathed heavily, eyes closed, feeling in his chest now a heartbeat, and another beat, slow and heavy, like the beat of something deep underground. The figure drew back his staff, turned his back. The blood has chosen. Take it to the place where the oath was last spoken. There, all the parts will come together, or dissolve. The man in white pulled back his hood, his voice soft. That place is only on the map, no one dares to keep it. The leading knight closed the chest. Looking south. We will find it, he said, his voice like a stab of a sword. The wind rose, white dust swirling into thin strips. The black circle in the middle of the field began to shrink, like a wound closing. But in the wind, the young rider heard a new sound, the heartbeat of the earth, beating in unison with his own. They left the white dusty field when the black circle had closed completely, leaving the ground flat and silent as if it had never been torn apart. But from that moment on, the young rider felt that each step he took was heavier, as if he were walking in a deep dream, where the heart and the earth beat in unison. The man in white unrolled the silver scroll. This time the map had changed, the silver lines of ink curved, converging to a single point at the very edge of the parchment, a shapeless, nameless void, just a broken circle as if the artist's hand had shaken or had refused to close it. This is where the oaths are taken, he said, his voice low, and where all oaths are destroyed. The leading knight stared at the broken circle, his eyes measuring the distance to a bottomless abyss. We will get there before anyone else does, he said. They followed a path that was not on any living man's map. By day, the path stretched like a strip of ash across a field of stone, without footprints or birds. By night, the path narrowed, and around it was a deep, watery darkness where no wind entered and no sound was heard. On the third day, a temple appeared in the gravel desert. No roof, no door, just 4 low walls and a black stone table in the middle. On the table, a fist-sized stone, opaque, engraved with the symbol of a 3-lidded eye, not for looking out, but for looking in. The leading knight touched the stone. Immediately, the darkness around the temple shrank, like mist drawn to one place. On the table appeared hair-thin inscriptions, twisted into coils. The oath is only complete when the keeper recites it for himself. The man in white lifted the stone and placed it in the young knight's hand. You keep the blood. You will also recite the last words. The young knight felt the stone cold to the bone, but inside it beat with his heart, a double beat, both of blood and of earth. And if I read? He asked. Then all the parts, heart, shadow, letter, breath, blood, will come together, opening the final door, the man in white replied. But that door does not lead back. They left the temple as the sun set. Ahead, the silver line on the map led them into a narrow gorge, the walls standing like stone pillars. In the gorge, the light became dense, no longer distinguishing between light and dark, only blurred lines of shape and shadow. In the middle of the gorge, a figure waited, not a person, not a beast, just a strip of shadow darker than all the others, standing straight, as tall as the wall. As they approached, the figure moved, parting to reveal a completely dark passage. The leading rider did not hesitate, stepping forward first. The darkness was not cold, not hot, but heavy as a stone wall pressing against it. There was no sound of footsteps, no sound of breathing, only the sound of each person's heartbeat in his head. Then, from the darkness, a round light gradually appeared. They stepped forward and found themselves standing on a rocky shore overlooking an endless sea of white mist. In the midst of the mist, an island of black stone rose up, on which was a giant circular table, its surface carved with concentric circles, and in the center was an empty niche, just the right size for the three-lidded ice stone. The man in white gave the signal. The young knight stepped forward and placed the stone in the hole. The sound of wind rose from the sea of mist, swirling around the round table. The circles carved on the table began to glow faintly, and then each of the other parts they carried, the heart of night, the shadow-absorbing tin foil, the silver scroll, the ceramic pot of breath, and the blood in the young knight's chest, all shook at the same time. The silver light shot up into the sky like a reverse water column, piercing the white mist, disappearing into the endless heights. The voice of the leading knight rang in the young knight's ears. "Read." And he read, each word echoing in his head like the sound of iron hitting another. But it did not hurt, only heavy and solid like placing each stone on the floor. When the last word left his lips, the sea of mist around him suddenly became quiet. The round table shook slightly, and then from the center of the table opened a narrow, deep crack, blowing up a stream of air that smelled of both fresh earth and burnt stone. The man in white looked down into the crack, eyes unblinking. "The last door," he whispered. "Now all that remains is to go through." No one said another word. The three stood at the edge of the crevice, listening to the air rising from below like the breath of some giant sleeping somewhere deep down. The silver light from the circles had died away, leaving only the dark slit open like an eye without lids. The leading rider stepped forward, not looking back. His feet disappeared into the darkness, and his whole body sank, as if swallowed rather than falling. The man in white followed, his cloak brushing the edge of the crevice, curling in the hot air. The young rider took one last look back. The white mist had dissolved into thin wisps of vapor, revealing the vast expanse beyond the rocky island, a space with no sky, no earth, just a void as still as dead stone. Then he stepped down. He did not fall. The darkness embraced his body like solid water, cold at first but growing warmer as he descended, until he felt as if he were stepping through a portal of flesh and blood, each breath he took matching the beat of a giant heart. When the light returned, he found himself standing in the middle of a long, high-vaulted corridor. The walls were covered with symbols he had seen scattered along his journey, the silver cross of the Templar, the triangular eye of the Illuminati, the double circle, the ancient, unreadable script, but here they all merged, overlapping, connecting like a single scripture. At the end of the corridor, a pair of blackened bronze doors stood still. On each wing, an open hand was carved, palm facing outward. The fingers were long and inviting, but in the center of the hand was a hollow circular hole. The man in white stepped forward, taking from his robes a three-sided stone. But he did not place it in any of the holes. Instead, he turned to the young knight, his eyes soft and bright. "It is not the stone," he said. "It is the blood itself." The young knight understood. He took off his glove and placed his bare hand in the socket. Immediately, a hot current passed from the socket into his veins, running straight to his heart. In his chest, the double beat became violent, and the blood in his body suddenly became like fire, rushing into the palm of his hand. A red drop spilled out, falling into the socket, and the door shook. The metallic sound echoed throughout the corridor, echoing through each symbol on the wall. The door slowly opened, revealing a huge round room, the ceiling as high as the upside-down sky. In the middle of the room was a circular stone table, 10 times larger than the table on the White Fog Island. On the table, a scripture was carved into the stone, each word as big as an adult's hand, emitting a warm golden light. The leading knight stood there, both hands on the table. He looked at them, his voice ringing like a bell. "This is the original oath. No order, no name, no clan owns it. Templar, Illuminati, all our branches. The root is here." The man in white stepped to the table, placed the three-eyed stone in the center of the engraving. The golden light instantly turned dark red, then spread like blood vessels across the table. The engravings began to shift, rotate, interlock into a new shape, a single circle, with an open eye inside, a cross outside, and at the intersection a drop of glowing blood. The whole room shook. From the walls, the shadows of the symbols separated, stepped onto the floor, and circled the table like faceless figures. Each shadow carried a sound, a prayer, a drawn sword, a whisper, all of it merging into a deep, steady, never-ending sound. The leading knight looked at the young knight. "Now you will read, for the last time. And this word will erase every name, every mark, leaving only one." The voice that answered did not echo through the air, but pierced the blood of all. "The goal is not power. It is not knowledge. It is to hold the door closed until the right person opens it, to destroy it." The young knight was stunned. Destroy. Every secret society exists only to delay, the voice continued. The Templars hold the heart, the Illuminati hold the word, the others hold the shadow, the breath, the blood. All are but watchmen, none is the master. He who opens the door enough is the one who can end the oath, and wipe its roots from all worlds. The faceless figures around the table began to crumble to ash, the ash flying into the cracks in the ceiling, merging with the eyes. The room shook violently. Long cracks appeared from the walls, white light gushing out like boiling water. The man in white looked up, his eyes blazing fiercely. "If I destroy it, every guild, every secret power, every hand that controls from the dark will disappear. But not even the memory of them will remain. The world will not know they ever existed. The leading knight looked at the young knight. The decision is yours. The blood has chosen you, and so has the oath. Once destroyed, there will be no turning back. The young knight clenched his fist, feeling the double rhythm in his chest merge into one. The deep, slow breath, the shadow, the words, the heart, the blood, all merged. He knew this choice was not just for himself, but for the whole world, even the worlds that had never known. He placed his hand on the engraved blood drop, pressing hard. The drop burst, white light gushed out from the table, drawing all three into a vortex. The eye on the ceiling closed, and before darkness fell, a final sentence rang out in his blood, "Good. From here on, there are no more secret societies. No more oaths. Only darkness guarding itself." When he opened his eyes, there was only the dawn sky and the gentle wind through the grass. There was no stone table, no round room, no trace of the leading knight or the man in white. In his hand, there was only a smooth, unmarked stone, cold as if it had just been taken from the bottom of a river. In the distance, a silver dusty path spread out, no map, no directions. And he knew, even though the secret societies had disappeared from human memory, somewhere, the seeds of darkness still lay in the ground, waiting for someone with enough to start again.